time.
It is, and you get used to it after a while. But it's like if you're doing that, if you're competing like that, you just kind of get used to the. It is a little bit monotonous, but you kind of get used to that because it's just you're normal.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of those things where when you have a goal in mind and you're going to be held accountable, on competition day, it kind of drives you a little bit more, kind of like we were talking about earlier. Like if you're a bodybuilder and you're going on stage in front of a bunch of people wearing nothing but like a Speedo, that's kind of incentive to be like, I probably should be training today, as well as someone's like, that's kind of thinking, yeah, maybe one day I'll compete in a bodybuilding competition. There's not that sense of urgency.
Exactly.
Like, yeah, I need to do this today.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Yeah, man, that's a long time in the gym. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. Something that I've been researching lately and playing around with is how serum testosterone levels drop after about an hour in the gym. And I've been trying to keep the workouts for our guys under an hour at a time. And so if someone wants to come in for like a second session, they can come in for a second session. But like each session in and of itself should be like under an hour, not including the warm-up. So like maybe including the warm-up and cool down, maybe hour and a half to 2. Be curious of your thoughts on that. Do you think that that is something that should be considered training time? Or do you think that it's just one of those necessary evils where there's just so much in CrossFit to do? You know what I'm saying? Like there's so many different aspects that you have to be good at that you just have to spend that much time in the gym.
Yeah, I think to an extent, like the more you can break up your training into like smaller chunks, the more intensity you're going to be able to bring to it.
Yeah.
So for me, like if I didn't do anything else except for train, like would it be ideal for me? I do my hour monostructural, I eat, stretch, recover, do my weightlifting, eat, for an hour, eat, stretch, recover, do my Metcon and accessory, in 3 distinct like hour and a half sessions. Would I probably get a little bit better results? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But it's also just like, that's not something that I can do. It's not something that most people can do.
You're saying referee roasters wouldn't be okay with that?
And just me leaving like halfay through my shift and then coming back like, no, it just doesn't work.
He's just here for the coffee.
That's exactly
he doesn't want to work here at all.
I do, I think there's something to that, but I also think that even if your serum testosterone isn't necessarily like at its peak, I still think you can perform at a pretty high level, even if it's not peaked.
Yeah.
And then I your testosterone replenishes overnight. And I think the way you recover ends up being more important than if you like spend 2 hours in the gym instead of an hour and a half.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the bigger thing is probably gonna be the recovery than necessarily like what your peak testosterone is during the workout.
Yeah. Do you think the reason that CrossFit volume is so high, I mean, because it's high. I feel like
if you competitive
CrossFit, I mean, it's up there. Do you think that the reason why is simply because there's so much you have to be good at?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like you can be the best weightlifter in the world and only lift like for an hour and a half a day.
Yeah.
You probably have to stretch more than that and mobilize and stuff like that. But it's just, you only have to be good at 2 things. If you get good at muscle ups, it's going to hurt your snatch.
Yeah. Potentially
could hurt your snatch, whatever. But yeah, I mean, that is the reason that we have to do so much.
Yeah.
Is, to be good at everything, you have to do everything.
Yeah.
And that is why it takes so darn long.
Yeah.
And I think that's also why it takes a really long time to be competitive.
Yeah.
I think people come in and, maybe they show a little bit of promise. They're like, okay, I want to go to the CrossFit Games in 2 years. And it's like, okay, in 2010, maybe that's doable.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now everybody at the games has years and years of experience and just years and years of being able to practice all that stuff. And that's why they're good at it. And, people are like, man, how can you possibly do, how can you have a, 30 muscle ups unbroken and a 7-minute, sub 7-minute 2K row and a 275 snatch and a, 500-pound deadlift. How can you do all of that stuff? And it's like, because they've only been doing CrossFit for like a year and they're like, there's no way I could ever do all those things.
Yeah.
It's like, you have to do that for years and years. Like the people at that level have been doing it 4 or 5 years, and that accumulated volume of everything is how they get to that level.
And a lot of those guys had great bases to begin with. You know what I mean? Man, I feel like especially the people that have a fairly strong base in the lifting aspect, I feel like they usually have an easier time than others. And maybe I'm shooting myself in the foot here and saying that, but the reason I say that is because strength takes so long to build, whereas conditioning as long as you have, to an extent, the right kind of fiber count, if you will, for that, it's not as long to get good at the aerobic side of things. You know what I mean? Because as long as you can maintain the strength piece, if you're already clean and jerking 315 coming into CrossFit, and you have a 7-minute mile, it's a pretty good mile, not a great mile,
but you get to and it's just all that time. Like, so in order, let's say you're somebody who comes in to CrossFit, like you were a college athlete, you've done weightlifting before. It's still probably going to take you 2 or 3 years to get to a 315 clean and jerk.
Yeah.
But if you come into it with a 315 clean and jerk, now you can spend those 2 or 3 years getting good at rowing or handstand walking or like something you really suck at.
Yeah.
You're able to put more time into that.
Yeah. You don't need to spend all these hours just percentage working the Olympic lifts. Which
exactly.
It takes a lot out of you to progress.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it takes your body so long to recover and get those numbers up.
Yeah.
And I guess that kind of leads me to my next question, which is, how do you organize your year? Actually, how did you organize your year beforehand when you were coaching for yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And then how does what's the guy's name? I know he goes by Zeus or whatever, but
Charbonneau, David Charbonneau.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought his real name was Zeus Boulder.
Dude, I did too for years. Like before I even worked with him, I'm like, dude, his name is Zeus. His parents are dope. Like, and then it turned out it wasn't. I'm like, oh, that's a bummer.
Yeah. Well, I was actually watching an episode of Freakonomics the other day. And they were talking about how your name can kind of impact how you do in society, and if your resume is accepted. And they were talking about how like John Wayne's real name was something else, and how a lot of these famous people change names. And I was thinking, it's like, Dillon's coach is Zeus Boulder. Like, there's no way that's his real name, because if it is, that is like the perfect name for a CrossFit trainer.
Oh, totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did the year organized look when you were coaching for yourself, and then compared to now? Like, is there more of like this off-season focus in this area, preseason in this area? How does that all look?
In the past, like when I programmed for myself, I did not have any structure. It was just like, it was just, like I said, it was just CrossFit. It was, I did my weightlifting and some conditioning and didn't do a lot of accessory stuff because I didn't think that was, what you're supposed to be doing. At this stage in, working with my coach, there's a little bit more structure, but it's not like we're only doing like really long, slow, like monostructural work and then like really heavy weightlifting, and then we don't put it together or something like that.
Yeah.
It's still, it's still just CrossFit. The mental organization is a little different, so if I know that I'm not competing for like another 6 months, if I feel a tweak here or there, I'm like, okay, I'm going to work around this, or I'm going to not do this, because I don't want to hurt myself for no reason.
Right. But
if I know that regionals is in 2 months and like I qualified and I'm getting ready for regionals, it's like, hey, my back hurts, like, too bad. You have to work through that. So I'd say in terms of organization, that's really the only thing that changes.
Okay. So you wouldn't say that there's a time of the year where you're really focused on adding on the pounds to your lifts compared to the aerobic side of things. Everything's going up at the same time.
I would say like when we were leading into the open, there was a lot less work on like, what's your 1 rep max? But we're still lifting.
Right. Because you got to maintain it.
The style of lifting changes a little bit.
Yeah.
Like you're not doing like a 1 rep max, rest as much as you want. It's like a difference between like, barbell cycling or heavy lifting in a Metcon, but it's still roughly the same. Because
you got to blend it all together. Kind of like this last year, you got 18.2. You got to hit this Metcon real quick, work up to 1 rep, you're done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's exactly right. You have to be good at everything, so you just have to keep practicing everything pretty much just all the time.
We'll get into injuries here in a second, but kind of last question on programming that I can think of right now is a lot of the programming that the guy that you're working with does for you. Is it a lot of it like this kind of old school linear side of programming? I'm referring to the weightlifting side of things, or would you say it's more kind of like this constantly varied conjugate type programming? How does
it's certainly not conjugate. Like we're not using bands and we're not using like box squats and stuff like that. Not that that's bad. It's just not what we've been doing.
But is it constantly like varied, or would you say it's pretty like linear in nature?
It's pretty linear.
Okay. So
Yeah,
you'll do
it's
like
very
5
linear.
reps at this percent this week, a little bit more percent next week, a little bit more percent next week type thing.
Yes, there was a little bit different. Like, so this past cycle has been more like, so on Monday we back squatted and it was like heavy one week, and the next week was more like volume. And then next week was heavy and there's more volume, but there was still like a pretty linear progression to both of it.
Yeah.
It wasn't like super linear where it's like 5 rep max, then next week add 5 pounds, then next week add 5 pounds. Not linear
Right.
that way, but we're not doing anything super crazy.
Yeah. I feel like that's one of the big debates always going on. I mean, in the fitness community, but also just in my own mind, is which route to choose. And there's, some that do both, but it's just, there's so many people on both sides fighting for power on their position on like, let's go conjugate or let's just go classic CrossFit and just keep it constantly varied. And then there's the other side that says, let's do linear progressions. Like, we know this works. And there's just that battle always fighting. It's hard to manage sometimes. It's hard to know which one to choose.
Well, I think you can honestly, like, I've had success choosing both.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of CrossFit is like you can do both.
Yeah.
So I particularly like the conjugate style for deadlifting, especially for people who are like real experienced deadlifters.
Yeah.
If they're at like a true max, then doing like really high percentage deadlifting all the time is just going to beat them up.
Yeah.
So doing some speed work, doing some band stuff, dynamic efforts, sumo deadlifts, varying your stances and stuff like that is super useful for building strength without burning out.
Yeah.
So it just, and you can do all of it. I don't think either of them is wrong. I don't think either of them is totally right. It's just how dogmatic do you want to get with it?
Yeah. And that's kind of the fun of having years and years and years to play with it. Because
Totally.
you don't have to stick with one.
Yeah.
And what we've been kind of doing here lately is we'll do like the first half of the year more linear style. And it's just easier to keep track of. It's easier to program because you got plenty of time before the next open, And so it's like, hey, the first 6 months, let's do some linear stuff. And it's very easy to plan out. It's like, we know we're going to probably hit in the ballpark of these numbers by the end of the 6 months. And most people did, had a lot of success with it. And after that, it's kind of like, all right, everyone's kind of sick of linear progressions.
Right.
Let's have some fun and just blast a bunch of different types of pulls and, different presses. And that way it keeps it interesting. You know what I mean? And plus, too, it keeps it more CrossFit-y, if you will, as the open gets closer and closer because people are used to so many different types of lifts and, used to putting it sometimes in Metcon, sometimes, before or after. Keeps things fun.
Yeah.
So let's go into injuries. What kind of injuries have you sustained and how'd you get over those injuries?
Luckily, I haven't had a lot.
Okay.
I did have probably one of my more like significant ones leading into regionals this year, which was kind of a bummer and kind of kept me from doing particularly well at regionals this year.
What did you get in regionals this year?
It was like 31st.
Okay.
It was pretty low.
Yeah.
The first year I did 19th. It was better, but second year not so good. But it was real high volume, real heavy leading up to regionals, especially like lower body stuff. There's a lot of squatting in this year's regionals and pulling. And yeah, it's kind of a disc issue, whether you want to call it a herniation or whatever it was. But about 2 weeks before regionals, injured that. So that last workout with thrusters and rope climbs, the heavy thrusters, like that belt brought me to my knees. That was pretty bad.
Yeah.
So regionals hurt pretty bad this year. Like I had to ride home in the car, like laying down. I couldn't sit because it hurt so bad. Like I had to lay down in the back seat. So
I had no idea you were injured this year.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really want to make a big thing of it.
Yeah. You didn't want it to be
plenty
like
of, and plenty of other people are hurt.
Yeah.
It's not an excuse. But yeah, it did. Outside of like the normal wear and tear, it's not necessarily. Luckily, I've been pretty healthy.
Do you know what that was from? Like, was it like a traumatic, like, ooh, that really hurt when you were in training, or was it just like, ooh, man, the past couple of days, I'm really still feeling it. You couldn't really pinpoint
it's more the second. I didn't like feel a pop, and it all went to to hell. It was more. It kind of built up, but yeah, I remember like a specific day where it kind of really got bad, but it wasn't like a specific one lift.
Yeah. So was it like was it squatting more that hurt you? Or?
Yeah, it was a squatting thing.
Man, so it was like really low back then.
Yeah.
And so after regionals was over, what did you do to heal that? Was there anything particular, or did you just take some time off?
Taking some time off was big. luckily it wasn't a true, like, I didn't rupture a disc or anything like that. So, you know, a disc herniation and basically just ends up like you have to take some time off and work around it.
Yeah.
And that's basically what I did. And even when I got back into the squatting and the lifting and stuff like that, my percentage work was extremely low, like even lower than what my coach was programming. You know, he was saying like 65, 70%. I was doing like 55, 60%.
Yeah.
Just to really repattern everything and make sure I was healthy. So I did this whole last cycle without a belt.